Okay, we're going to talk about flatworms today, and I'm sorry I couldn't be here to go over this with you in person, but we are still going to dissect the Planaria tomorrow, so I want to make sure that you are prepared to do so. And, of course, as being worms, planarians are in the kingdom Animalia, so please turn to page 14 of your lab manual right now so you can get this important information that will be on your pre-dissection quiz tomorrow on Planaria. So, of course, these flatworms are in the kingdom Animalia, and the phylum that flatworms are in, literally, probably from Latin, translates into flatworms. If you think of the root plane, they are in the phylum Platyhelminthes. Platyhelminthes. And they are in the class Turbellaria. And this is a class of flatworms that are all free living. That means that they are not parasites. So they are not parasites. Turbellarians are free living, so that means they are not found inside of organisms. They live in water, usually, either in fresh water or in salt water. In fact, sometimes I'm unable to get planarians by just calling up the supply store and asking for them and paying for them. So if that happens, I usually am out at the creek overturning rocks, and I'll bring a bunch of sediments from the stream out in the back behind the school, and I'll go through them, and I'll undoubtedly get a handful of planarians that way. But this year I was taking an easy way out and just called up the place and ordered them to make sure that we have enough and that they are here when we needed them. So let's look a little bit at Planaria before we answer the next question. Okay, so if I do a Google image search of Planaria, you will see some diagrams and actual pictures of these guys. So to answer that question that asks about what type of symmetry do Planaria have, if we look at this organism, you can see that we can put one plane of symmetry that divides this into equal left and right halves. So that means that these animals have bilateral symmetry, just like you have. You can put a plane in between your eyes, essentially, and you have almost roughly symmetrical equal left and right halves. Of course, it's not going to be perfect, but pretty much that's what defines what bilateral symmetry is. And since they're flat, all of their organs and their systems are layered like a sandwich and pressed very flatly up against each other, so it's hard to look at any one system when you have the whole organism present. So we're going to use the diagrams in your packet on page 15 to look at each system individually, but you have to imagine that all those systems are together in a very, very flat worm that is not more than a couple millimeters in its height. They can get centimeter or a couple centimeters long, but they're very flat, as their name implies. Okay, moving on to page 15, we're going to start with the digestive tract of this guy. And, well, actually, I can come out and say right now, they're saying it's a guy. The flatworms do not have separate sexes. So they have both male and female parts on one organism. And we'll see that with a couple of other different organisms. But we're going to start with the digestive tract, how they eat, how they process food. And just like Hydra has, that we talked about, they have something that is called a gastrovascular cavity. And This is equivalent to their stomach, or equivalent to your stomach. They don't have a true stomach, but they have a gastrovascular cavity. That's a place that's going to store and digest their food. So make sure that you know the structure and the function of these particular parts. And so they have one place where they can both store, digest, process food. And the way that food gets into their body, so if this little specks of dust here are their food, planaria they feed on something called detritus, which is essentially broken down materials in their environment, so decaying matter in their environment. That's usually what they feed on. If I want to feed them in the lab, or if we feed them, we can give them some ground meat, raw liver. Even I've seen planaria like impale egg yolks before, and it's really cool because they're very dark, but when they put the egg yolk in them, they kind of lighten up because of that yellow color. All right, so how they get that food into their body, I guess we can call this opening a mouth, although just like Hydra, they have a singular opening that serves for both taking in food and eliminating waste. So it's not technically a mouth, but it's the part that the food enters and goes through into their body. And that mouth is connected to this tube that essentially brings the food, very muscular tube called a pharynx, that is going to bring the food into the body of the animal. So this is called pharynx, Pharynx, and that's a muscular tube that brings food into the body. And you have a pharynx too, but that's your throat. So if you have a inflammation of your throat, that is called pharyngitis. Not to be confused with laryngitis, where you can't speak, but a sore throat is called pharyngitis. But in their body, it's actually more equivalent to a esophagus, or tube that brings food into their gastrovascular cavity. All right, so that's it for their digestive tract. And again, remember, all of these organ systems are all on top of each other, flattened in order to make the organism flat. And so next we're going to look at a system of the planaria, and that's its nervous system. And we're going to talk a little bit about nervous systems in general. When we looked at the Hydra doesn't have a central nervous system. They sense equally among their tentacles, and they have something called a nerve net. A net, as you can imagine, is almost like a web. It's spread equally throughout the organism. But once we start getting into higher animals, they are going to have a central nervous system. And that makes these animals something called cephalization. Cephalization is in concentration of neurons at the anterior end. Anterior end of the organism. So you could see here these green, or these kind of egg white looking shaped structures are essentially equivalent. They're neurons at the anterior end of the organism. Concentration of neurons at the anterior organism makes this organism cephalized. And you are cephalized because you have a concentration of neurons at your anterior end called your left and right hemispheres of your brain. So just like that, this organism has these two areas, and I'm just going to kind of circle them. They're not the eye spots in there, but this kind of larger regions that have these projections from them, the nerves projecting from them. These things are called cerebral, means referring to a brain. So cerebral ganglia. And what a ganglion is a concentration of nerves. And because these are at the anterior region, we call those a cerebral ganglia. And this organism is cephalized because it has that. So on the quiz, if I asked you which structure indicates that this organism is cephalized, you would answer the cerebral ganglia. And ceph meaning referring to the brain as well. So if a person has a brain infection, that's called encephalitis. In addition to their cephalization, they have what are called nerve cords proceeding from that. These nerve cords are called ventral nerve cords. These are called ventral nerve cords. And you have a nerve cord. Yours is not towards your ventral side, or if you think the ventral part of an organism is its belly side. So your nervous system is not concentrated on your belly side, it's on your back side, which is your dorsal nerve cord. And if you think of a shark having a dorsal fin, that is on the back of the organism. But these organisms have ventral nerve cords, which makes them more sensitive on their belly side than on their back side. So when you are manipulating them, keep that in mind. And then connecting those two nerve cords with each other are lateral. These are things that go side to side. So lateral nerve cords connect, like the rungs of a ladder, connect the ventral nerve cords together. So lateral nerve cords. So overall, this organism has quite a bit of sensitivity and feeling to it because of these presence of these nerves that are throughout the body. In addition to being able to sense things by feeling them, they also have a sense they can sense light. So these two little kind of eye-looking things, they're not really eyes. Like we think of eyes as something that forms an image that we can see, but they do not form images, but they sense light. And these can either be called eye spots or ocelli. Eye spots are used to sense light, and because they're so flat, they need protection. Otherwise they're going to become damaged. So since they live under rocks, it would be useful for them to sense light, and they respond negatively. They're called phototaxively negative because they don't prefer to be in the light. They prefer to be in the dark. That indicates that they're in a region where they're protected. They're not out where they can be victim to predation. So the eye spots allow them to sense light, and they generally will show a response where they are going to have a negative or move away from the light, phototaxively negative. And so when I buy these things, and they come shipped in a box, so that's no problem. They're dark, but when they get here and they have to stay here for a few days before we experiment with them, I make sure that I store them in a cabinet so they are not exposed to the light, and because eventually their eye spots will become desensitized to light, and then they will not show the same response that they normally would to being in a light environment. All right, so that's the nervous system of the planarian. And next thing we want to look at is the reproductive system. Okay, planaria are, they have both male and female sex parts in the same organism. So sometimes that's called hermaphrodite, but let's learn a little bit more technical name for that. It's called monoecious. They are monoecious, meaning one organism has both sexes. And that term can be a little bit confusing because our species is dioecious, meaning we have male and female in two different sexes. But if they have both male and female in a single individual, that means that they are monoecious. And so it says here that it's, for clarity, it's showing that one side is male and one side is female, but the reality is, again, it's a flatworm, so both of these systems are kind of pancaked on top of each other. And this system here that just consists of like little tubes and ducts, these are the testes. And I'm not going to go through every single little piece on this. I just want you to know basically three parts on this. The testes, the ovaries, and then there's tubing to take these things to where they need to go, and they have a penis as well, and that's how they impregnate each other. Okay, next thing that I want to go through is the excretory system of the planarian. And the word excretion, I don't care how many times I say this each year, there are still people that get this wrong. But the word excretion means to eliminate urine, liquid, or things that are dissolved in liquid waste. And in your body, this is equivalent to your kidneys. Your kidneys are your excretory organs. Of course, you're going to store that urine in a bladder. An excretory system is not the same as getting rid of solid waste. So a lot of times people answer this wrong in saying that the excretory organ of an animal is its anus. But that's not correct. Excretory means how do they get rid of urine? How do they get rid of liquid waste? How do they conserve water by still getting rid of toxins that are in the blood? And your kidney does that. And in these animals, they have a different system for that, but it's equivalent to kidney. They have something called flame cells. And as you can imagine here, it's not shown very good in your picture. That's why I want to show you this one separately. They have flame cells. So all along their whole body, they have these cells that will process toxins from their body. And since they're so flat, they don't need a circulatory system. They don't need blood. But their body fluids are, wastes are excreted, are taken out of there and excreted out of these flame cells directly out of the organism. So these are very close to the edge of the animal, and those are used for excretion. So time and time again, we're going to keep coming back to excretory organs. Excretory organ in your body is the kidney, and a frog has that same excretory organ. The excretory cells in a planarian are flame cells. The excretory organs in earthworms are something called nephridia, which the root NEPH, a doctor who deals with kidneys, is a nephrologist. So, but for the planaria, they use something called flame cells for excretion. So for every organism that we look at from now on, you definitely need to know what its excretory organ is. Okay, so that is what you need to know about planaria. You need to know its kingdom, phylum, class. You need to know that they are not parasitic or they're free living. Some live in salt water, some live in fresh water. And you need to know those 4 systems that we went through. Digestive, its parts and its function of those parts. And the nervous system, so the parts that we went over and the function of those parts. The reproductive systems, that they're monoecious, meaning they have one organism, one individual has both sexes, monoecious. And you need to know that they use flame cells for eliminating toxins from their fluids, just the way that we used kidneys. So flame cells are their excretory organs.